members of Canada's armed forces face potential expulsion after this incident. Take a look. On Saturday, the self-proclaimed Proud Boys interrupted an Indigenous protest. They carried the red ensign flag and sang "God Save the Queen." The men accused the protesters of disrespecting Halifax founder Edward Cornwallis, who established a policy of genocide against the Mi'kmaq people. The Saturday confrontation never escalated into violence and lasted about 10 minutes. Both the Chief of Defence Staff and the Defence Minister denounced the actions, and the five have since been removed from duty and training while the military conducts an investigation. So who are the Proud Boys? What do they stand for? And why did they crash an Indigenous protest? Joining me now from New York City is Gavin McGuinness. He is the co-founder of Vice. He's the host of his own show, and he's the co-founder of the Proud Boys men's movement. Gavin, thanks for joining us. What's your reaction to the news that the 5 men involved in the Halifax incident have been removed from duties?
I think it's abhorrent. I think that we have stabbed our servicemen in the back. We should be ashamed of ourselves. This whole story has spun out of control, and a bunch of rumors made up by Antifa and the alt-left have become the truth, to the point where the top brass is already apologizing. They've already been sentenced, and they didn't do anything.
Straighten out the rumors. What are the rumors?
Here's what happened. They're sitting in a bar on Canada Day. It's a hard word to say, Canada Day, and they hear there's an anti-Canada rally going on at the park. So they go by to check it out. They've got a giant flag there upside down that says decolonize. And our guys are carrying a Canadian flag, and they go, what's going on here? They get the protesters get very confrontational, tell them to get the hell out of there. They talk about how Halifax is stolen from the Mi'kmaqs, and they try to have a civil discussion. Eventually, and by the way, our guys, the Proud Boys, were told, take that flag down on Canada Day. And eventually they realize this isn't going anywhere, so they politely leave and walk off. And that becomes disrupting an Indigenous ceremony. Disrupting a disingenuous ceremony is what it was.
So what were the 5 men involved? You know the 5 men. What was their intention?
To see what was going on. They didn't know anything about it. And they went there, asked a few questions, and then left. This notion that they went there to disrupt it or destroy it is insane, and you can clearly see that in the video. I don't think anyone involved in this has watched the video.
Given Cornwallis issued a bounty on the scalps of Mi'kmaq people, can you see why the Indigenous people were protesting?
Can you see why Cornwallis issued a bounty on Mi'kmaqs?
What does that mean?
Well, what happened with the Mi'kmaqs was the French were using them to fight the English, and they were kicking our butts. Cornwallis, after several murders, said, let's issue a bounty. Not one of those bounties was collected. You see, this is the kind of dialogue those guys were hoping to have. They don't see it as sacred Indian land, nor did the Mi'kmaqs. They signed a treaty. This is all ridiculous, but you're allowed to discuss these things, and of course they're allowed to have their protests. You're also, as servicemen, when you hear Canada's being attacked on Canada Day, you're allowed to go check it out. And that is why I'm starting a petition today at Save the Five, 5 spelled out, SaveThe5.com. We're going to get 10,000 signatures, and I'm going to go hand-deliver it. I'm going to fly to Halifax. I'm going to hand-deliver it to this Rear Admiral John Newton, who threw his own men under the bus.
The CDS as well put out a statement saying that this was inappropriate, the Chief of Defence Staff.
Yeah, I know. Scott Taylor wrote a great book about the Canadian military called Tarnished Brass, and the top brass of Canada's military are corrupt. And the way they've treated their own servicemen, who, by the way, signed up to die for Canada, and called them racist. 2 of the 5 guys were Indian that were there. They had 1 Indian. We had twice as many Aboriginals at our thing, whatever the hell we did, just walk into a park. And we've got the Minister of Defense, Harit Sajan, the Chief of the Defense Staff, General John Vance, all these guys just stabbing the servicemen in the back. As a Canadian, I'm embarrassed that our soldiers are treated this way.
Can you just I want to take us back just a little bit. Can you tell me about the Proud Boys, how many members, and what exactly the Proud Boys stand for?
The Proud Boys have 2 requirements. It's a men's club, so you have to be a man, a cis male, and that you think the West is the best. We are Western chauvinists, chauvinists meaning passionate patriots. And we are an international organization. There's even some in the East, in Japan, thousands of members. And beyond those two caveats, there's nothing else. There's a multiracial organization. We're like the Elks Lodge or the Knights of Columbus. And it used to be very common up until the 80s, way back to the beginning of North America, to have all these men's clubs, the Shriners and all that. And that's what we're bringing back, just having men's clubs.
So what's happening with the five right now?
Well, they're not allowed to talk to the media. So I can't get it out of them. I can't even get them a lawyer because it's military law. So they'll be assigned a lawyer to defend them if charges are brought. The petition is the best I can do, but these guys are being pilloried for doing their job. Okay, I want servicemen. If servicemen hear there's an anti-Canada rally on Canada Day and the flag's being desecrated, I want them to go check it out. I don't want them to disrupt it or stop it, but go check it out. That's what they did. They asked some questions, they were asked to leave, and they left. How is that?
Sorry.
How is that disrupting anything?
Okay, Gavin McGuinness, I want to thank you for your time today.
Thanks for having me on.
Okay, the Proud Boys organization was only founded last year. So is it just a men's club, as its co-founder argues? How fast is it growing? Is the group a microcosm of a surge in populism worldwide? Joining me now from Oshawa, Ontario, is Barbara Perry. She's a professor at the University of Ontario Institute of Technology and the author of a national study into right-wing extremism in Canada. Now, we just heard from the co-founder of the Proud Boys, Gavin McGuinness. He says that they are a simple men's group. What do you think?
Well, that's certainly part of it, and I would say probably boys group rather than men's group, to be honest. But if you look at their Facebook, if you look at any of their social media venues, you see that it's much more than that. It's also constructed around some of the traditional tropes of what we're seeing increasingly far-right populism in particular. So I think they're much more than just a men's group.
Can you give me an example of how they're right-wing?
Yeah, so they, again, very much in line with, what we're seeing across the U.S. and to some extent in Canada, sort of a preoccupation with the preservation of what they see as loss of white male power, in particular, power and privilege in Western cultures across the board. And so there's an emphasis there on rhetoric against multiculturalism, against immigration, against big government, and against globalization as well. And so you see them, attempting to defend what they define as Western civilization, which is really, as they see it, through a white, not so much Christian, I think, in this group, but a white male perspective.
Now, McGuinness says that on Canada Day, the group of five they were just checking out what they thought was an anti-Canada Day protest. They debated with the protesters and then left. What's wrong with that?
Well, I think to see it as an anti-Canada demonstration, what they interrupted was a ceremony, in fact, that asked that we recognize that, 150th anniversary of Confederation was not necessarily a cause for celebration for all people in Canada. It's a symbol of colonization. So it wasn't necessarily anti-Canada so much as it was against the celebration. But I think also to the extent that they were, proclaiming the superiority of what they see as Western culture, and to frame, even as they did, Canada still, and I think that region of Canada as still as a British colony was, added fuel to that fire.
Now, are the Proud Boys dangerous?
Initially, I first heard of them probably 6 or 7 months ago. Someone forwarded a video to me that I think was one of their own YouTube videos. And at that time, I didn't take them very seriously. They seemed to be really a bunch of frat boys, just on a lark, but also, there was some, I think, harassment of people on the street in that video. But they didn't seem that sort of serious about their perspective. It really looked like it was all for fun. But I think as they sort of surprised themselves in terms of the response they've had, and I think that's made them a little more serious. So they've just recently added, for example, they have had 3 degrees of initiation, and the 4th degree they've added is that to be fully a member, they now need to beat up someone from the anti-fascist side of the continuum. So I think we're seeing a bit of an escalation there amongst these groups, and an escalation in their capacity to engage in violence.
Now, you did a major study of far-right groups in Canada that was published last year. Why is there a rise in far-right groups?
I've been describing it as sort of a perfect storm of global and national and more local politics. Of course, we can point to the Trump effect across North America, and certainly that has been one of the catalysts for the emergence in the last 8 months or so. But it was already on fertile ground here. Even when we finished the survey, finished the research in 2015, we were seeing well over 100 active groups in Canada. So they were already here. But also in terms of the broader politics, we had sort of the anti-Islam stance of Harper and anti-Muslim stance in Quebec under Marois, and more recently Kelly Leitch during the leadership campaign here. So I think there was a readiness amongst some small parts of the population to accept that kind of sentiment and to act now and be emboldened, I think, by Trump at last.
Is there a difference, though, between Canada's far-right groups and those in the U.S. and elsewhere?
Yeah, to date, I think there's quite a distinct difference. Smaller in numbers, obviously, fewer groups and smaller groups, I think. And to date, again, we haven't seen some of the kinds of violence that we've seen in the U.S. Armored car robberies have been quite common there to fund themselves. Mass terrorist attacks like McVeigh's. Short of Bissonnette's attack on the mosque, we haven't seen that level of mass violence associated with the groups here. Again, I say as yet. There's always the potential, I think, as they become emboldened and perhaps even more frustrated by the juxtaposition of a far right or someone who espouses some far right views in the U.S. to someone who they see as the antithesis in Trudeau here. So I think that there's some backlash to Trudeau's inclusive politics.
Barbara Perry, I want to thank you for your time today.
Okay, I thank you.